Welcome back, where I'm joined by political science experts Dr. Mark Jones from the Baker Institute at Rice University and Dr. Kevin Stewart from the University of St. Thomas. Based on our political environment today for you guys, do you think democracy is in trouble? You first, Dr. Jones.
I don't. I mean, I think there's some stressors certainly in our democratic system, and they're more severe than they were, say, 4 to 8, 10 years ago. And the polarization is a concern. But I think we still have enough guardrails, both institutional and societal, such that our democratic system is still on solid ground. But I think we can't take it for granted. That is, if things continue to polarize and if doubts about basic rules of the game and norms begin to fray even more, we could be in for some trouble. As I think I'm at least hopeful that as Donald Trump moves away from the scene, we'll get back to at least something more akin to normal, although still far more polarized and frayed than it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Dr. Stewart, your thoughts?
I'm probably a notch or two more worried than Mark in that I see a tremendous loss of faith and trust in political institutions, that's part of what's going on, and that we need to see political figures like Trump more as symptom than cause. I mean, of course, some causal, but often a symptom of an environment where the electorate is just whipping back and forth. I mean, this is 4 years after the electorate gave control of Congress, and then a couple of years ago the White House fully to the Democratic Party. We're now on the cusp of what looks like it's going to be not just a red wave election, but a red tsunami election. And so that an election or an electorate that's whipping back and forth like that is very unhappy about something.
Well, it's interesting that in this past week, President Biden said, quote, "In our bones, we know democracy is at risk." And he said this.
Recent polls have shown that overwhelming majority of Americans believe our democracy is at risk, that our democracy is under threat. They too see that democracy is on the ballot this year.
Interesting with that concept. A lot of times the voters you talked about, they're voting on the bread and butter issues of grocery and inflation. Dr. John Diamond from Baker Institute, finance expert, said if 80% of what's going on inflation-wise today would happen no matter who was in power, based upon that. But the shaping of it is that the party in control has power.
Right. For the presidents get too much credit in the good times and they get too much blame in the bad times. But the reality, as Dr. Stewart mentioned, is that Democrats control all of Washington, and so because of that, they're going to get undue blame for the inflation that's occurring. Just as if the economy was booming, they would get undue benefit.
Dr. Stewart, you mentioned former President Trump just a moment ago. How interesting is it that the United States electorate, especially the Republican base, is still so much enamored with the former president, considering that there's zero proof of any kind that the 2020 election was stolen? There's plenty of evidence to show that the former president was at least partially responsible for the January 6th attack on the Capitol and was trying to persuade the Georgia Secretary of State to change the vote, and top secret documents removed by him from the White House, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yet still, Republicans want all of those topics to kind of go away and keep us focused on other things. How long do you think that sort of significant contribution to the electorate dialogue is going to be based upon what Mr. Trump leads out?
Yeah, my hot take on that one is that it's going to be very hard to sustain that story come Wednesday when Republicans have won an enormous number of races up and down the ballot. Because they're not going to want to be calling those races into question. So now all of a sudden we're going to have lots and lots of very legitimate outcomes from elections. And we may see either immediate or, hopefully immediate, but shortly after that, a narrative shift away from that kind of narrative when, in fact, a large red wave election happens.
Dr. Jones, how optimistic are you that we're going to be evolving into something that's going to be more like a, quote, normal democracy, if there is such a thing? You've seen a lot of them, and they're really hardly, I guess maybe some would say that there is no such thing as a normal democracy anywhere.
Well, I mean, I think we're in a situation where I think we will get there at a certain point, but we may go down a little more. I still see Trump as a major issue, in part because most of the Republicans who are essentially criticizing the electoral system don't really believe that, but they're afraid to run afoul of Donald Trump and his supporters and to contradict him openly. I think the more he fades from the scene, I think the more, at least many of the more realist and pragmatic Republicans will take center stage. Now, of course, there's still a lot of Trump loyalists out there that do actually believe it, but you can only do so much with delusions.
So election deniability is out there front and center as well. Dr. Stewart, any concerns about those folks who are running and may win offices who are outwardly denying that the election was legitimate in 2020?
We've seen a lot of election denial has been an increasing tactic over the last 20 years in American politics. And I think it is coming to, I mean, it's obviously coming to a head here. Hopefully it's coming to a head, and then hopefully it will diminish after that. I think if those people win, we will again see those concerns start to fade, because what are they going to be challenging at that point? Their own election?
Well, some have said that they will, but we'll see. Dr. Mark Jones, Dr. Kevin Stewart, thank you so much for your insight. I hope that we can do it again soon.